Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Am reading video for Friday, May 15th, 2020. I don't have a lot to report this week, which is kind of worrisome because technically I put 2 more books than usual on my monthly TBR, and now I have half the month over. But here's what I got for you. I started and finished Ragtime by E.L. Doctorow. I put this on my maybe mid-rush readathon list, but I knew at the time it was really a fake option, that it really didn't fit the requirement about being about religion in any real way. I was mostly interested in this book, which I put on my TBR, my Goodreads TBR years ago, because of the Jewish content, which is much more cultural and barely there to begin with. This is a pretty famous book, I would believe, written in 1975, and it's been followed by movie and play, a musical, I mean. And it's more or less about the entwining of 3 families and a bunch of real-life historical figures from the early 20th century in America. The fictional families are an upper-class white Protestant family, a fresh-off-the-boat immigrant poor Jewish family, and then African-American family of sorts, in that there are 2 parents and a child, and the 2 parents are about to get married. It's told in a perhaps less accessible style than what I like or is my usual. I'm kind of reminded of what I thought of Beloved by Toni Morrison last week, because it's narrative heavy with little to no dialogue. Or in this case, most of the dialogue, even if it is dialogue, is told in a rambling fashion. We're sort of being told the story as a rambling report of events, and within it, Doctorow is able to dissect social issues, for the most part, that may have been relevant in the early 20th century, but were certainly relevant in 1975 and today. And there's like an anachronistic part, I think, particularly with sort of a black vigilante group that seems much more in line with what he might be seeing in 75 than what could have been possible in the early 20th century. Although one of the real-life characters who came into the story and interacted with some people was Emma Goldman, who was an anarchist, well, a Jewish-born anarchist at the time, who definitely was interested in violence herself, but even she, I don't think, started such a big vigilante group. I don't know. There's certainly some corners of history I could go into and see what's the real truth. I gotta think one of the reasons Doctorow had a lot of fun with the real-life characters is, you know, you can't slander the dead. So one of the aspects I found interesting about this book, especially when I went online and spoiled myself in the middle of it by reading a bunch of reviews, is the fact that the person people ding as the main character of the book is this African-American man named Coalhouse Walker, who doesn't even enter the story until like about halfway into it. It almost reminded me really of To Kill a Mockingbird in a way, by, you know, Harper Lee, in that people glomp onto the story of the trial as the most important, even though it really only takes up a small part of the book. And I think part of that has to do with the fact of how socially important it is in an arena that goes beyond, like, you know, interpersonal problems. You know, most of To Kill a Mockingbird is about Scout's Bildungsroman, you know, just a random white girl in the South, whereas the trial speaks to much bigger American issues going on at the time. I wouldn't correlate that exactly to this book, because I don't think a lot of characters did have much of a personal arc in this. There wasn't much for personal development. I mean, it really was, I guess, more experimental, or like Doctorow was trying to use narrative as a way to get messages across, and he wasn't as interested in character, I would think. I mean, there were a couple that I think kind of worked, but for the most part it seemed like they were there to advance the themes of the book. A lot of them having to do with divisions between the poor and the rich, and of course rampant racism. I mean, Coalhouse was compelling as a character because he is this well-to-do black musician, really more, I think, classical pianist, although Doctorow kind of weaves in that this is the era of ragtime. And what sets him apart is that, for the most part, he doesn't view himself as less than. He gets involved with one of the main families, the white upper-class family, who finds his baby buried in the ground and takes in the baby and the mother, Sarah. And those two characters have, like, almost no character development at all. They're just sort of there for the plot. But Coalhouse is there to try to woo Sarah and get their marriage going. And he comes in and he ultimately is invited into the parlor with these white people, and he acts like he's equal to them. What? You know, that sort of thing. And then it comes to a head later on when he is driving his car, which first of all, you know, would always set white people on edge, like, you know, a black man in a car. And the people at one of the volunteer firefighter organizations hassles him and vandalizes his car, and the police are no help at all, and things spiral from there. I won't give away many spoilers, but and that's what's most compelling in a way about Coalhouse is that you know, he won't sit and take it, but at the same time, I mean, as compelling as that is, I think it really is more about the themes that Doctorow wants to go through than character development. Of all the real-life characters that made their way in here, I think I liked Houdini the most. It might be biased by wanting to identify a little bit with at least one Jewish character, because as much as I liked Goldman's furor, as it were, her strong convictions, you know, this whole anarchy thing is still pretty damn violent. And I think I'll get to the fictional Jewish family a little later, but anyway, I guess I liked Houdini. I liked the role he played in the story because one of the, I guess, other minor themes about ragtime is the idea of being on the cusp of scientific modernity, and about people still living in a world where, like, they want to kind of believe in magic and illumination, even as scientific advancement is really moving forward. And so, you know, Houdini, you know, was part of that world, and that he was a magician. And I like how Doctorow went into who he was. I mean, like, he knew that what he was doing was tricks, and talked a lot about Houdini's athleticism, which would, of course, help him out in his major escapes. And I liked thematically the idea of when his mother died and he was mourning her, that he was, like, doing worse and worse stunts, and, you know, was sort of like trying to tempt fate and death himself. So, you know, I guess, you know, it gets a little almost magical realism-y without really being magical realism-y. I guess I'm just always a fan of how people in society try to poke at what can't be understood, even though obviously science is advancing, so we're understanding more and more about life and death and so forth. Henry Ford and cars are also sort of a minor theme in this, particularly because Henry Ford and J.P. Morgan are characters together in this book. Morgan is a really infamous, rich man of the time who basically starts to see himself as a reincarnated god, and, like, thinks of Ford in the same line because Ford was able to modernize industry. And so there's a interesting commentary there about how the modern world and how capitalism works, and it can be so dehumanizing in a way because, you know, people become part of that industry. And meanwhile, he and J.P. Morgan are sitting in a private library talking about, like, being reincarnated pharaohs or whatever. So, I don't know, the rich come off a little wonky here, a little, I don't know. There's a lot, there's people with so much power, and this book ends at the cusp of World War One, and Morgan is visiting royalty in Europe, who are more or less about to lose a lot of their power at long last in a way. So yeah, politics are flushed throughout all of this as well. He packs a lot into such a small book, so maybe that's why the characters aren't all that realistic. In fact, I would say, and the sort of black militia group action around it isn't really all that realistic either. But I think it speaks more broadly, well, first of all, to the 70s, and just more broadly to social themes and social justice themes that the country's had to deal with. This feels really rambly. I have to get my thoughts more streamlined, perhaps, for my Goodreads review, because I review everything on Goodreads. But I guess my final thought will be about the Jewish family, and they're disappointing, I mean, like a lot of the other characters, they're sort of known mostly by their titles, which are Mame and Tate, which are mother and father in Yiddish. They're from Latvia. And they move into the slums of the Lower East Side and are always scrabbling for money. And Mama does menial work for a boss who starts to sexually abuse her. And Tata throws her out into the street because, it's all about him and his pride. So I found it difficult to follow this man around for the rest of the story. Perhaps I judged him rather harshly in the rest of his dealings. Like, talk about a shitty socialist, given where he ends up in the end. Talk about someone who doesn't live up to his convictions, whatever they might be, although for the most part his convictions seem to be feeling sorry for himself. I don't know. It just, in terms of social issues that are addressed in this book, sexual violence against women didn't do so well, I don't think. In this storyline and another storyline involving real-life people. So yeah, I guess it's an interesting book, cramming a lot of different thematic elements in a somewhat unique sort of story structure. Though personally I'm always going to be drawn the most to, deeply realized characters, which for the most part this is not what this book was about, but I'm still glad that I gave it a go. Next, I continued to make a little bit of headway into Carry Her Home, short stories by Caroline Bock. This is a collection published by a local to me press, the Washington Writers Publishing House. And this is autofiction, short stories and flash stories roughly about Bock's own upbringing. I mean, I was kind of drawn to it because she has Jewish and Italian parents, the way I do. But there's a more melodramatic part to this story as well, in that her mother at the moment is living in a psychiatric hospital, and her father seems a fair bit eccentric and is raising 4 kids on his own. I read in this go-around the titular story, Carry Her Home, which actually takes place on the elevator in the psychiatric institution where the Pops, the father, is taking the mother back up to her room, and the mother's mostly out of it, and the father is angry at her, but he's also sort of battling with the idea of, do I want to leave her in this stinky, smelly place, or do I want to take her home with me? Can I carry her home yet? So it's a moving story in that way. And a funny piece of correlation in these 2 books is that apparently both of the families live in New Rochelle, New York. So what do you know? And finally, next on my docket, I think if I angle the phone or iPod this way, you can kind of see the cover, is Underland by Robert Macfarlane, which I have on my Libby audiobook drive from the library. I believe this book is either about archaeology or mythology or both, about the idea of the underworld in societies and cultures throughout the ages. I'm going to go into it with that perspective and proceed from there, but I won't be telling you my thoughts about it for at least a couple more weeks because I am reading this book as part of the BookTube Prize. The BookTube Prize is an annual award that is judged by people in and adjacent to the BookTube community, where we read and review books published last year in literary fiction and nonfiction and whittle down to our favorites in both of those divisions. And so yes, I'm reading Underland as part of my nonfiction group for the quarterfinals, and I will leave more info to the BookTube Prize down below. So that about covers it for me now. So we're halfway into May, and after finishing Ragtime, I've officially completed 3 books this month, and I have 10 that I want to read total, so 7 more. Hoping I can push myself through this. I have 2 more for the BookTube Prize, one that I've talked about on this video. I have my 2 real books for the Maybe Midrash Readathon. I have the short stories, which technically I've at least begun. And then I have the new Hunger Games book, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which I'm hoping will be on my doorstep on Tuesday. Maybe it's a bit presumptuous to hope for immediate mail during a pandemic, but you know. On top of that, I plan to do a new page 112 tag to pick out yet another book from my shelves to read this month. So I'll be putting that video up sometime next week, so stay tuned. And hopefully I can use this little outro to propel myself to meet those goals. And we'll see where I am with them next week. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.